Set the oven to 350 and pulled the brisket out to rest on the counter, the way my grandmother always said to do it. Let the meat breathe before it goes in the pan. 30 minutes. She was very specific about that. I could hear her voice in my head while I measured out the brown sugar and smoked paprika for the dry rub, and for a second I almost felt okay. It was the Sunday before Christmas. I had been cooking since 6 in the morning. My husband's family was arriving at noon. There were going to be 11 of them. I need to back up because the cooking is not really where this story starts. The cooking is just where everything ended. My name is Nora. I'm 32. At the time this happened, I had been married to my husband for 6 years, and together for 9. I had a good job, senior product manager at a mid-sized tech company in Austin, Texas. I made decent money. Not life-changing money, but the kind that lets you sleep at night. We owned a townhouse together, split 60-40 on the mortgage, my 60. We had a joint account for household expenses and kept our personal income separate. That had been his idea, early on. I thought it was modern and practical. I stopped thinking that sometime around year 3, but by then it had just become the way things were. My husband. I'll call him my husband throughout this, because honestly, that's all he was by the end. A title. Grew up about 40 minutes outside of Austin, in a small town where his family had lived for 3 generations. His mother, Loretta, was the kind of woman who ran every room she walked into. Not loudly, just completely. His father had passed when my husband was in college. His older brother Wade had taken over the family landscaping business. There was a younger sister, Amber, who was sweet and quiet and always looked a little apologetic, like she was sorry for existing in the same family as her mother. There were aunts and uncles and cousins. There were always aunts and uncles and cousins. There were always aunts and uncles and cousins. Every major holiday, they all came to us. Not because we had the biggest house. We didn't. They came because I cooked. I had offered, once, our first Christmas together, nervous and wanting to make a good impression. I made a full prime rib dinner from scratch, roasted potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade rolls. Loretta had eaten 2 servings and said, "Well, she's useful." My husband had laughed. I had smiled like it was a compliment. That was the first year. By year 4, it was just assumed. Nobody asked anymore. The calendar invite from Loretta would appear in my inbox. Our house, noon, Christmas, and I would begin planning menus in October. This year I had planned brisket, which is Texas, and it felt right, roasted sweet potatoes with chipotle butter, cornbread from scratch, green salad, because Amber was on some kind of diet that changed every few months, and I always tried to include something she could eat without guilt. A cheese board for when people arrived. 2 pies, pecan, and a chocolate chess pie that my husband's grandmother had taught me to make specifically because she said nobody else in the family had ever bothered to learn. I had been up since 6. It was now 8:15, and I was on my 2nd cup of coffee, and my husband came downstairs in his robe, looked at the kitchen and said, "Do we have any of those protein bars left?" I pointed to the pantry. He found one, leaned against the counter, and watched me work for a moment. "You know," he said, "my mum mentioned maybe doing something simpler next year, like catering." I kept rubbing the brisket. "Sure," I said. "She just thinks you stress yourself out." I did not say what I was thinking, which was that Loretta had never once offered to bring a dish, had never once shown up early to help set up, and had never once said thank you in a way that felt like she meant it. What I said was, "I'm fine." He took his protein bar and went back upstairs. I finished the dry rub and slid the brisket into the oven. They arrived closer to 12:30, which was fine. I had accounted for that. Loretta came in first, as she always did, and swept through the living room like she was doing a property inspection, touching things. She picked up a candle from the mantel, turned it over, set it back. "It smells good in here," she said, not to me specifically. Wade came in with his wife Cheryl and their 3 kids, who immediately went for the television without asking. Amber came in last, gave me a quick hug in the kitchen doorway and whispered, "It looks incredible. Do you need any help?" I told her I was fine. She looked relieved and also a little guilty about being relieved. For the next 2 hours I moved between the kitchen and the dining room, refilling drinks, checking the brisket, warming the cornbread, assembling the salad. My husband sat in the living room with his brother and the cousins watching football. Loretta held court at the dining table with the aunts. Nobody came into the kitchen except to tell me what they were hoping would be on their plate. Is there any chance the brisket is fatty? Wade can't do fatty. Cheryl's been off gluten, did I mention that? She might need something separate. Nora, honey, is the cornbread going to have jalapenos? My stomach. I made a separate plate for Cheryl. I checked the cornbread, which did not have jalapenos, which it never had, which Loretta knew because she had eaten it 8 times before. At 2 o'clock I called everyone to the table. The food was good. I knew it was good. The brisket had come out exactly right, tender, smoky, the bark on the outside perfectly set, the sweet potatoes were caramelized, the cornbread was light. I had done everything correctly, and I knew it. Loretta took a bite of the brisket and tilted her head slightly. It's a little dry, she said. Cheryl nodded, which I think was reflexive. Amber looked at her plate. My husband said nothing. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat down. We were halfway through the meal. The kids had left the table, the adults were talking about property taxes and some cousin's recent divorce, when my husband set down his fork and looked at me across the table. Not at me the way you look at someone you love. At me the way you look at something you've been figuring out how to move. I've been thinking, he said, that maybe we should talk about making some changes. The table got quiet. Not immediately. It went quiet the way a room does when people sense something and pretend they don't. Changes, I said, to our situation. He paused. He had clearly rehearsed this, or tried to. I think we want different things, Nora. I think we wanted different things for a while. I looked around the table. Loretta was cutting her food very carefully. Wade was looking at the wall. Amber had her hands in her lap. They knew. They all knew. Every single one of them had known this was coming before I did. Are you doing this right now? I said. Not a question, just a statement of fact, checking it against the evidence in front of me. I think it's better to be honest. At Christmas dinner, I didn't want to wait until after the holidays and have it hanging over us. There was a particular kind of silence that followed that sentence, the kind that has weight. I thought about the 6 hours I had spent cooking. I thought about the brisket, which was not dry. I thought about the chocolate chess pie cooling on the counter, the one his grandmother had specifically asked me to preserve. I thought about the protein bar he had grabbed this morning while I was rubbing seasoning into the meat at 8 o'clock, and how he had already known then. He had already known for however long it had taken him to decide, and he had let me cook for 11 people while knowing. I put my napkin on the table. I stood up. Loretta, I said, and my voice was remarkably steady, which surprised me. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the meal. The pie is on the counter when you're ready. Recipes in the notebook in the second drawer if anyone wants it. I went upstairs. Here is what I did before I left, and I want to be specific about this because I think it matters. I did not just walk out. I had maybe 40 minutes while they were still at the table. I could hear the low hum of voices, the scrape of forks, the absolute absence of anyone coming to check on me, and I used that time. I went to the filing cabinet in our home office and I pulled out every document with my name on it. My passport, my social security card, my car title, my own tax returns from the past 4 years, which I had filed separately, the deed to the townhouse which had my name on it as co-owner, a folder of financial statements, my personal savings account, which my husband had never had access to, and which I had been quietly contributing to for 3 years on the advice of my mother, who had been through a divorce herself in her 50s, and had told me once, not unkindly, "Always have your own money, Nora. Not because anything will go wrong, just in case." I took my laptop. I took the external hard drive that had backups of everything. I took the small fireproof pouch I kept important documents in. I did not delete his texts. I did not touch my phone except to open a new note and write down the timeline of everything I could remember from the last 6 months' dates. Things he'd said, changes in behavior. I would not understand until later why that note would matter. At the time it was just something to do with my hands while my brain was still somewhere far away from my body. I packed a bag. Not frantically. Deliberately. I called my sister from the bathroom with the door locked and the fan on and told her I needed to come over. She said, "I'm putting the kettle on." I came back downstairs with my bag. They were still at the table. Someone had started on the pie. I picked up my keys from the hook by the door. My husband came into the entryway. "Nora, I'll be at my sister's," I said. "My attorney will be in touch." He looked surprised. which was interesting, given that he had apparently planned this. I closed the door behind me. My sister lives 20 minutes away in a 2-bedroom apartment with a pull-out couch and a terrier named Biscuit, who sleeps on top of your feet and weighs 11 pounds and is the most comforting creature I have ever encountered. I sat on her couch that night with Biscuit on my feet and a mug of tea I wasn't drinking, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. 6 years. Christmas dinner. 11 people. The thing that kept coming back to me wasn't the humiliation, though that was there. It was the premeditation. He had sat across from me at breakfast 8 days earlier, while I made a shopping list for the holiday groceries. I still had the list on my phone: brisket, sweet potatoes, pecans, heavy cream, and he had already decided. He had eaten the food I cooked and watched football with his brother and come to bed next to me every night, leading up to this, and he had known. I thought about the text messages sitting on my phone. I did not delete them. I kept thinking about the comment my colleague had made once offhand about a contentious contract dispute he'd been through. Whatever you do, keep everything, even if it seems small. I don't know why that surfaced. I was grateful it did. My sister sat next to me and did not say, "I told you so," which I know she wanted to, because she had told me so, not about this specifically, but about the general shape of things. She just refilled my tea and said, "What do you need first?" "An attorney," I said. "I'll look in the morning." "No," I said. "I have someone. My co-worker, her brother, handles family law. I've had his number in my phone for 8 months. My sister looked at me for a second. 8 months, she said. I had a feeling, I said. I met with the attorney, I'll call him my attorney, 3 days after Christmas. He reviewed the deed, the mortgage split, my financial records. He was thorough and calm and did not seem surprised by anything I told him. The good news, he said, is that the asset picture here is clearer than most. He walked me through the townhouse. My 60% contribution was documented through bank records going back to when we bought it. My personal savings account had never been commingled with marital funds. My income records were clean. Is there anything he might contest? He might try, my attorney said, but the documentation is strong. He asked me about the text messages. I showed him the screenshots I had taken the night I left. Full threads, timestamps, nothing deleted. He nodded slowly. There are some things here that are useful, he said. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask him to. I trusted him. What I will say is this. The texts told a story. The story was not flattering to my husband. The story explained certain things about the timing, about why his family had been so quiet at that table, about why Loretta had not looked up from her food when he made his announcement. They had known for months. The call started 72 hours after I left. The first one was from Amber, which I answered because I genuinely liked Amber, and I thought she might be calling to apologize. She was. She was crying, and she said she hadn't known what to do, and she was sorry, and she should have told me, and she understood if I never wanted to see her again. I told her I didn't blame her, and I meant it. She was in an impossible position, and she had always been kind to me. The next call was from Cheryl, Wade's wife. She said she thought the whole thing was not handled well, and that if I ever wanted to get coffee, she was around. I thanked her and said I'd be in touch. Then Loretta called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She called from a different number. I let that go to voicemail too. I saved all of them. My attorney had specifically said, "Save everything." My husband called 11 times in the first 48 hours. 11. I saved every call log. I saved every voicemail. When he texted, I screenshotted immediately. My attorney was building a file and I was building it with him. Here is what I think happened. Though I can't be completely certain, I think the plan had been for me to fall apart. I think the assumption, and this is the thing that bothers me most, honestly, was that I would be so devastated, so lost, that I would make bad decisions quickly, that I would agree to things I shouldn't agree to, that the shock of it would work in his favor. I think they did not anticipate that I had a paid-off car in my name, 3 years of personal savings, a job I had kept and grown throughout our marriage, and an attorney's number already in my phone. I think they definitely did not anticipate what came next. What came next was this. 3 weeks after Christmas, my company announced that a product line I had led from early development through to market launch, 18 months of work, had been acquired. Not the company, just the product. A licensing deal. A significant one. Part of my compensation structure had included a small equity stake in that product line, negotiated quietly 2 years earlier when I had pushed back on a bonus offer and asked for something longer term instead. My manager had agreed. HR had documented it. I had copies of everything. The payout, after taxes, was not a life-changing number in the way that the word life-changing usually gets used. It didn't make me rich. What it did was make me entirely, completely, without any doubt financially independent in a way I had not quite been before. I found out on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, my husband had called my work number, which he had never done before in 6 years, and left a message with the receptionist asking me to call him back when I had a chance. I did not call him back. Loretta called my sister. She had gotten the number from my mother-in-law's contacts, where my sister was listed as my emergency contact. She asked if there was any possibility of the two of us sitting down to talk. My sister said she would pass along the message. She did, over the phone that night, in a voice that could not quite keep the satisfaction out of it. "They want to talk," she said. "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" I thought about the morning of December 23rd, the oven set to 350, the brisket resting on the counter, my husband in his robe, looking for a protein bar while I had been up for 2 hours already. "I want to finish what I started," I said. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. My attorney was good at his job. The asset division reflected the actual financial contributions which were documented and clear. The townhouse was appraised, and I bought out my husband's share at the assessed value. My 60 had grown, in the time we'd owned the property, to something worth buying out cleanly. I did. He took the settlement and moved back to his hometown. I stayed in Austin. I got a small place of my own, a 1-bedroom bungalow in a neighborhood I had always liked, near a coffee shop I went to every Saturday morning, and a running trail along the creek. I painted the kitchen a color I had wanted for years that my husband had always said was too much. It is a deep, warm terracotta, and it is not too much. It is exactly right. Amber texted me a few months after everything was finalized. She said she was sorry again, a longer message this time. She said she had started therapy. She said she hoped I was doing okay. I told her I was. I told her I meant it. We text occasionally now, not often, but occasionally. She is trying to figure out how to be her own person outside of that family, and I think she's going to get there. Loretta, I have not heard from since the settlement closed. My husband, I have not spoken to. I think about Christmas a lot differently now. This year I made brisket again, same dry rub, same 350 oven, same 30 minutes resting on the counter. I made it for my sister and her partner and my best friend from college and her husband who had just moved back to Austin from Seattle. I made the chocolate chess pie from the recipe in the notebook, which I had taken with me when I left, because it was mine now. I had been the one who learned it. Nobody said the brisket was dry. My sister said it was the best she'd ever had. I think she might have been trying to make me feel good. It didn't matter. I made it for people who would say it either way, and that made all the difference. There's a practical piece of this I want to say plainly, because I have thought about it a lot since. Do not delete the messages. Whatever you're going through, whatever the version of this that applies to your situation, keep the texts, keep the voicemails, keep the emails, not because you need to be vindictive, because documentation is not the same thing as revenge. It is just evidence that something happened the way it happened, and you deserve to be able to prove that. Keep your own financial records, know what's in your accounts, know what's in your name, not because you're planning for things to go wrong, but because you are a person and you are allowed to know the shape of your own life. Have your own money. My mother told me that years before any of this. It is the truest thing I know. I'm not going to tell you I'm grateful for what happened. That's not something I believe in, the idea that you have to reframe every painful thing as a gift. Some things are just painful and that's allowed. What I will say is that I'm okay. More than okay. I'm the person I was before I started making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's plan, and I had forgotten how much space that person takes up. She takes up exactly the right amount. I set the oven, I adjusted the temperature, I let the meat breathe. Some things you just know how to do. You just have to remember that you know them. I've thought a lot about what made the difference, not just in the outcome, the settlement, the bungalow, the terracotta kitchen, but in the moment itself. The moment I put my napkin on the table and stood up. It wasn't bravery. I want to be honest about that. My hands were steady, but my chest was not. What it was, I think, was preparation. Years of quiet, unglamorous preparation that I hadn't even fully recognized as preparation until I needed it. The thing about what my husband did, announcing it the way he did, at that table, in front of all of them, is that it was designed to destabilize me. I understand that now. The timing, the audience, the fact that Loretta already knew, that Wade already knew, that all of them had sat down to eat the food I made while carrying a secret I wasn't allowed to have. All of it was meant to make me feel small and alone and without options. And it might have worked if I had let the years of accommodation quietly erase the version of me who kept her own records, kept her own savings, kept her own counsel. Nora, the Nora from 6 years ago who offered to cook that first Christmas dinner. She was trying to earn something, belonging maybe, approval. A seat at a table she thought she had to audition for. And somewhere in those 6 years, without quite realizing it, I had confused earning love with losing myself. I had cooked 11-person holiday dinners and accepted it's a little dry and smiled at things that weren't funny and made myself smaller and smaller until I almost couldn't remember what full size felt like. The preparation, the savings account, the documents in the filing cabinet, the attorney's number already in my phone. That wasn't cynicism. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't me planning to leave. It was me refusing to fully disappear. It was the part of me that listened to my mother when she said keep your own money, not because things will go wrong, just in case. It was the part that filed things carefully and kept records and never let the joint account become the only account. That part is not romantic. It is not the part of the story anyone wants to dramatize, but it is the part that mattered most. What I know now is that intelligence without integrity is just cleverness, and it runs out. My husband was clever. He had timed things carefully, planned the announcement, presumably thought through the asset picture, or thought he had. What he hadn't accounted for was that I had been paying attention too, just quietly, just steadily, just long enough. There's a version of this story where I hadn't, where I had let the savings slide, hadn't kept the documents organized, had deleted the texts in a moment of wanting it all to go away. That version of me would have been sitting across from a very different settlement offer, with very different leverage. Amber is still finding her way, and I think about her sometimes. She was a person who spent so long inside that family's gravitational pull that she almost forgot she had her own. Watching her try to figure out who she is outside of it, that's its own kind of courage. The quiet, unglamorous kind. The kind nobody applauds in real time. I'm not the same person who set the oven to 350 that morning. I don't think I'm supposed to be. What I kept is the part that knows how to make the brisket right, how to let things breathe before they go in the heat, how to be patient with a process even when you can't yet see the outcome. The rest I left on that table, right next to the pie.